Welcome, comrades. Good to be here with you again. It's been, I think, a couple weeks since I get to speak to you all directly. It is always fun having this sort of parasocial dynamic where I get to speak to you straight. Today we are going to talk about the current conjuncture of this very scary world we are living in, where everything seems to be escalating us towards a nuclearized third world war. Of course, we know who the provocateurs always are. It's the American empire and its proxies in the Middle East and everywhere else. But we're going to talk a little bit about an article I had the opportunity to publish recently in the China Academy. For those that don't know, it's one of the largest English-speaking media networks out of China, with 150 million subscribers into their newsletter. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll give some ACP updates, and then we'll talk about the current conjuncture of the world, whether it's the U.S. and what's going on in the South with Hurricane Elena, or, of course, the situation in the Middle East or West Asia, right, to not give it a Eurocentric classification, where things are getting very hot and very, very scary. So we'll get into all that and much more right after this. I want to remind you all before we start, though, that the Midwestern Marx Institute is a people's-funded institute. We keep the lights on with your donations. So if you have the means and appreciate our contacts, our contributions, we would very much appreciate super chat questions or super stickers or whatever you have. We're also getting very much throttled in the media. So if you don't have the financial means to help in that front, you can always help by liking the stream, by sharing, by subscribing. If you're on Twitter, by retweeting the stream and doing all the things you know how to do in order to boost this content out there. The algorithms, of course, are not going to be promoting a communist broadcast, live broadcast to the general masses. So it's up to you to help us escape this algorithmic silo that the algorithms put us in, and help us reach regular people. So I leave that in your hands. That's your homework. You're not passive observers here in the Midwestern Marx live broadcast. You're active ones. And I hope you can all share the stream with everyone you know. So stick around. We're going to listen to our amazing and beautiful introduction, and then we'll get started right after.
High Sheriff Hazard is a hard man to be. High Sheriff is his only plan. He digs through pockets, takes what he can, for he's High Sheriff Hazard. He caught me one evening, and here's what he said: "You look like a Russian, you look like a red, and if you're fond of your skin and your head, beware the High Sheriff of Hazard."
All right. Well, that introduction always gets me ready to go. Please do let me know in the chat if you're seeing me okay, if there's nothing lagging. We're streaming, I believe, for the first time ever in 4K. So I don't know if there's any actual difference on your end, but on my end, it says that it might slow down the program. So please do let me know in the chat if it slows it down at any moment. Today, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to start with some ACP updates from the American Communist Party. I'm going to go through some of the stuff that we've been posting on Twitter, let you guys know what we're doing, and encourage those of you that haven't already and that feel like you have the discipline and the time to contribute to this great party of ours to consider joining. It's a party that's extremely active, both in the national and international scene. We've been making very beautiful connections with comrades from around the world, specifically in the global south. And we have many exciting news coming out of that front that we'll be making public at some point in the near future. Am I reading the comments? Yes, I'm reading the comments. So if you have questions in the comments, shoot them in there. I'll be sure to answer. If you want to secure an answer to your question, the best form to do that is through a super chat. But I see Samuel here. Shout out to you, Samuel. I very much appreciate the stuff you post on Twitter. The name, yeah, the end of history. I actually got it because that's the name of the article that I had sent in to China. I ended up changing the name last minute, but I use it as a phrase that I sort of have as a standalone in the middle of the article. And I think the fact that your album name was also the end of history shows that we're not pulling these ideas out of our the hole where the sun don't shine. They're in the air. They're part of the zeitgeist. And as I try to make evident in that article that I'll be speaking about in just a moment, even the most dogmatic defenders of the unipolar world have come to face the reality that that world that we had in the 90s and in the early 2000s is no longer. That the world is developing out of an era where the U.S. can just impose its will on the rest of humanity. That a multipolar world, although not fully here, is starting to rise, and I think it's something that us communists should welcome, not uncritically, but we should nonetheless welcome it as a step forward from the decrepit imperialist Anglo-American capitalist system. So it's in the zeitgeist, the end of history. It was never the end of history, actually, as I make evident in that article, but nonetheless, it's a useful turn of that Fukuyama phrase, which he took from Hegel. Okay, so some updates on the ACP. Let's see what's going on here. Present, share screen. We haven't been posting much lately, but we have been doing a whole lot. We have a big old stack of stuff left to be posted. Our chapters have been extremely active around the country, doing similar types of work. Let me see if there's a better screen that I can use here. Is this one better? There we go. I just have to scoot over. Okay, I'll scoot over so that my face doesn't get covered. Our chapters have been extremely active around the country. I want to give a special shout out to some of our chapters in the South who have been helping clean up their communities after Hurricane Helene completely devastated large swaths of the American South. We put out a statement about this. We actually have comrades from chapters from around the country and some chapters in Canada who have been helping to donate to our comrade chapters in the South in order to do the work that they've been doing. We haven't had a chance to post the pictures yet, but we have them. I want to specifically shout out Comrade Harold in Florida, our Florida executive, who I saw on Instagram. He was able to clean up, I think, a couple truckloads of debris. So shout out to them and shout out to all the comrades in Florida and the comrades from outside of the Florida chapter that happened to be in Florida in their vacation, but nonetheless, we're still getting to work. So I think the individual I'm talking about knows who they are. Shout out to you. That's the sort of discipline that we need in a Communist Party setting. Besides the work that we've done on that front, this has been, I think, one of the more special things that we have been able to do. Our comrades in ACP Kansas were able to donate $660 worth of school supplies to a school in Westmoreland, Kansas, in Junction City. We actually received an email from the principal of this school thanking our party and thanking our comrades in Kansas for the work that they've done, and emphasizing, how important it was in the lives of, poor children, children who have been left behind by this system that only benefits and upholds the interests of those who have large swaths of capital. And there's a very interesting contradiction there, because in the US, we're told that we have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And many American democratic theorists and philosophers, such as John Dewey, who, for those that don't know, I work at the Center for Dewey Studies. One of my jobs is to edit unpublished manuscripts from John Dewey. But someone like John Dewey, known as America's philosopher of democracy, said that the essence of democracy is found in that statement from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address: government of, by, and for the people. And Chinese scholars like Zhang Weiwei have agreed. That's in part why they can say confidently, and this is a statement that I would agree with, that China is the place where we actually see a society live up to the ideals that America has posed for itself, but has never been able to make actual. The first article I published in the China Academy was precisely on that very subject. I explore how some of the main thinkers in American history, people from Thomas Jefferson to Thomas Paine, Martin Luther King Jr., and John Dewey, have been extremely critical of the sort of society that raises to the level of supremacy the interest of capital and its accumulation. And I've always put forward the idea that in order to have a truly democratic society, you need the people's will to be the one that is guiding the trajectory of your society. And that's not at all the situation that we have here in the US, but that is the situation that you have over there in China. So in that article, if anyone's interested in finding it, you can go to the China Academy and just put my name next to it in the Google search. You'll be able to see how I make the argument that the democratic ideals of 1776, of some of the best and most progressive traditions in American history, are actually best embodied in China. And as I mentioned, Professor Zhang Weiwei, who's done tremendous writings on the idea of a civilizational state, tends to agree with that opinion. And I cite him basically saying, that very point, that democracy of the people, by the people, for the people, and with the people, he adds, is something that is much more real in Chinese socialist democracy than here in the US. But either way, we're told here in the US that we supposedly have this government of, by, and for the people, but the vast majority of the population is completely left behind by the government. That's something that's evident in the reaction to Hurricane Helena. It was evident in the reaction in the early 2000s to Hurricane Katrina. And it's evident in the fact that we have widespread poverty in this country. 1 in 8 children in this country, right? Supposedly the richest country on the history of the planet. 1 in 8 children go hungry every night. We have a situation where 70 to 80% of Americans are a lost paycheck away from homelessness. So a lost paycheck away from joining the 600,000 plus Americans who are wandering around in a country that has 33 times more empty homes than homeless people. None of this is necessary. This wasn't divinely ordained. This isn't the situation that some benevolent, omniscient, all-powerful God input upon humanity. This isn't, if you're not a theist, this isn't a situation that's endowed by nature. It isn't biologically necessary for things to be like this. This is the product of a moment in history that we're in, uh, and that moment is one where the logic of capital is the one that's dominant. We live in a capitalist society. The effects that we see are the effects of capitalist society, specifically in a period of decadence, in a period where the contradictions are more heightened than ever, and the necessity for building something new is evident to anyone who can see two fingers in front of their faces. So, comrades in ACP Kansas were able to help hundreds of students with school aid, and that's something that the principal of the school was able to reach out to us and thank us for. I thought that was very special. We also had some statements that were made about the martyrdom of Saeed Hassan Nasrallah, someone who, it's obviously not communist, obviously not a Marxist-Leninist, so not ideologically aligned with us, but we don't look at the world from the standpoint simply of ideology. We look at material forces. And Nasrallah, objectively, was an anti-colonial leader, just like there were many anti-colonial leaders in the 20th century that, although sympathetic and collaborating with the socialist bloc, themselves did not consider themselves socialists, or at least not Marxist Leninists of any type. And the Marxist Leninist position was always to support these national liberation struggles against imperialism, precisely because imperialism is not just a policy choice that the most powerful capitalist countries make. Imperialism is capitalism itself. It's capitalism at a distinctive moment in its trajectory. And it's a moment that paradoxically, and here's where dialectical contradiction analysis comes in, it's a moment that simultaneously creates the conditions for the development of socialism. That's the Leninist point. Imperialism signifies a decay of capitalism, but at the same time, the ripening of the conditions for a socialist working class or anti-colonial national liberation revolution. And someone like Nasrallah and all of the other leaders in the axis of resistance, they're anti-colonial leaders. Sure, they come at it from a different angle than a Marxist-Leninist would. That doesn't necessarily matter all that much in terms of what side they're on. They're very much clearly on the side of the forces of progress, of the forces fighting against a decrepit imperialism that brings nothing but violence and blood and dirt upon humanity, as Marx once said. So we made this statement upon the martyrdom of Nasrallah, as well as other leaders of Hezbollah. It had amazing traction. I haven't seen any other self-proclaimed socialist organization, party specifically in the U.S., make a similar statement. But for us at the ACP, it's clear. The world is splitting itself in two. There's moments where that does happen. You could see in Lenin and any of the great dialectical thinkers in our tradition that, it does come a time where these binaries become real. The binary between the imperialist world and the world that's struggling for some form of sovereignty, that's a part of this heterogeneous block of different ideologically motivated and class-rooted forces. But that is an objective split. And when you look at it on a planetary, global dimension, it's a contradiction. It's a unity, one planet, one world, that is divided by these two antagonistic forces, one of them which seeks to sustain the world in a period where, its own contradictions have forced it to move beyond it. The imperialist bloc wishes to sustain the world in a condition where one country and its proxies and its puppets around the world was able to impose its will on all of humanity, on 7 billion people. So that is not a sustainable position to be in. No empire in history has been able to last. And what we're seeing is the decay of American empire. and the world fracturing itself into two sides: the side that fights against American imperialism and the side that doesn't. And if after the defeat of American imperialism, the new uh, uh, sort of dominant logic of geopolitical relations becomes multipolar, with time, all we can expect is that a new series of contradictions will arise, a new series of contradictions will become heightened, and similar struggles, or perhaps struggles of a different character, will be emerging, because that's how everything in the world functions. Everything in the world is in a constant state of process, propelled by its own imminent internal contradictions. And nothing that comes to be, as Goethe once said, uh, exists forever. It always perishes wretchedly. So that's what we're seeing right now. And the American Communist Party, in terms of political forces in the U.S., is the party that, in my opinion, I might be wrong, but it is my opinion, it's the party that most consistently sides with the forces that are challenging imperialism, even if it is unpopular. Our anti-imperialism is not, as Eddie Smith has mentioned, an anti-imperialism in hindsight. We don't wait until it is popular to condemn the proxy war against Russia, to condemn the genocide against the Palestinians, to condemn the proxy war against China and Taiwan, to condemn the lies about some Uyghur genocide that is completely baseless. We don't wait until 10, 15 years when everyone knows it's a lie, and then they start apologizing and changing their opinions on it, as people have done with the Iraq war, with the invasion of Libya, etc. We say it then and there. We say it as the drums of propaganda are drumming, very loudly. We say it in those moments where it's very unpopular to say it. We say it in the moments where, we have our jobs taken away from us. We get interrogated at airports. We get harassed. We get fired. We get accounts banned for saying it, but we say it. And it's because, we are principled. We are committed to the truth and to the struggle for a better humanity, a humanity that creates the conditions for the free development of all, that creates the conditions for human flourishing. And in that way, it's a project that's very much rooted in the aims of the history of philosophy. That's what Greek political philosophy was centered around. How do we create the sort of societies, specifically in Aristotle, the sort of societies that create the conditions for the flourishing of individuals, that promote eudaimonia, some actual concrete human flourishing and contentment and fulfillment in individuals' life. There's a speech that Robespierre gives 3 months before they chop his head off, where he makes the statement that the French Revolution is the culmination, the embodiment of the tradition of philosophy. And I think we can generalize that a little bit and say that that's what socialism is as well. Socialism embodies the rational kernels of the sorts of societies that the best thinkers in the history of humanity have held. That's something that the Chinese have been noticing as of the recent decades, the homologies between Marxist thinking about communism and ancient Chinese philosophers' theorization about the ideal society. And I think it's worth for us thinking in that form as well. It's a form that allows us to connect to the American people and to the thinkers that are already in the common sense of the American people. You can't be, for instance, a genuine Christian, someone who's committed to living like Christ, to building the sort of Christ-like society, if you're not a communist. And, this isn't just me telling you this. This is Pope Francis saying that there's a lot more similarities between communism and Christianity than between communism and capitalism. And I think we can say the same thing for all of the Abrahamic religions, and we can also say the same thing for most of the history of political philosophy. Okay, so that's that in terms of updates. Did the ACP address the CNN hit piece? I honestly don't know if it's even worth it. We have an ACP adjacent organizations such as the Institute and Infrared. We have talked about how, completely devoid of journalistic integrity this documentary is. It starts by basically giving 20 minutes of airtime to a troubled individual named Charmhole, who has nothing to do with any of our organizations, and then paints this individual as the archetype of this new communist movement. Then it goes on to basically draw a very clear and distinct line between all of the other forces on the American left and the ACP, and presents a very clear dichotomy of the rest of the left, which has frankly not been able to do much in the U.S., turning around and condemning and alienating themselves from this new rising movement. And let them do what they're going to do. That's fine. We're here. We're building our own thing. We're rooted in the American people and in the service of our people, of our communities, of our workplaces. We're rooted in a conception that thinks that the class struggle has an international dimension. So for us, anti-imperialism isn't just some foreign policy choices that are otherwise distinct from our national approach to the class struggle. For us, anti-imperialism is fundamental to the class struggle itself. So we're going to continue building. We're going to continue attracting hundreds of members as we have. We're going to continue winning the sympathy of communities around the country who, when the government fails them, the ACP shows up and does what they have to do in order to serve those disadvantaged communities. And we have no purity fetish, man. If some of these people who have condemned us over the years come to their senses, realize that all of the absurd things they've said about us being fascist, red-brown alliance, all these ridiculous things that are baseless. Once they realize that's not the case, we'll have our arms open here, and we'll receive them. And we understand that everyone, just like nature and ideas and society, everyone as individuals is also in a constant state of flux. They're also changing. And, we can't blame people for what might perhaps be just a simple moment in a larger development. We'll keep our arms open. We'll not be waiting for them, but we'll keep our arms open to anyone who wants to get serious and build as we are. Okay, let me go through the chat, see what's going on. Christianity is deeply reactionary also. I would say that it institutionalized itself into something that's could appropriately be called reactionary. This is the dialectics of religion and Christianity that Marx and Engels were keenly aware of. And after Engels' death, the young Kautsky picked up the project of Christianity and analyzing it from a Marxist perspective, and actually wrote a fairly good book on the history of Christianity. And our position understands that religion is kind of ambiguous. It could be a source for inspiration of progressive struggles. In my opinion, the real ethos of a figure like Jesus is a revolutionary one. But it could also be used by the powers that be to pacify people, to domesticate them, and to force them into accepting structures of oppression and exploitation that are in many ways contrary, fully opposed to the ethos of something like Christianity or Islam or Judaism or any of the other major religions. So it's dialectical, right? That's the meme. It's dialectical. You see, it has negative components and positive ones, and our goal should be to tease out the positive ones and employ them in our attempt to advance the class struggle forward. History doesn't happen anymore. Today's the most uneventful time to be alive in all of history. Besides a few minor annoying rebellions here and there, liberal democracy won the end. That's a very narrow view of the world, and that's a view that has been shared by a whole lot of humanity, and they've been very wrong to share that. The slave owners and the planter class thought that their society was the end of history. They thought that it was naturally ordained, and if things might have been different before, it's come to an end, and this is what we have for good. The same thing was thought by the feudal lords. The same thing was thought by the capitalist class early on, and the same thing is thought by some people now. But if there's something that is constant, is change itself. And as we are currently in the precipices of a third nuclearized world war, I think the sentiment couldn't be any more wrong. Let's see what's going on. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the article. Oh, here's a super chat. Thank you, Marcus, so much for the €6 super chat. What's worse optics, publicly fighting or not criticizing clearly problematic statements like they who bad because they who killed Jesus? I don't know what you're referring to there, comrade. What's worse optics, publicly fighting or not criticizing clearly problematic statements like they? I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know. Recent post from Hinkle. Let me see. I'm not on Twitter very often, folks. I'm actually, most of my time is spent on reading and writing. Okay. All right, I see what you meant. It's obviously not a sentiment we agree with. It's yeah, it will be discussed internally within the party. Not happy with that statement, and I think it's counterproductive. I think that it goes against some of the stuff that he's done as well in the past of challenging the JQ nonsense. But yeah, I do not endorse that, and obviously I understand the undertones behind it. So thank you for the super chat. I should watch less and read more. Yeah, I mean, reading is extremely important. It's also an exercise in discipline and concentration. So it's not just about the knowledge that you're receiving. It teaches you how to be able to concentrate. And I think that every communist, every individual involved in the class struggle needs to be able to have a certain degree of capacity to be concentrated for, I don't know, half an hour, an hour, which is how I read. I read in periods of interval. I spend half an hour to 45 minutes, and I take a break for 15, 20 minutes, and then I go back and I do that 7, 8 times a day. But you also shouldn't be fully disconnected from what's going on online, because that is where the vast majority of people are. That is where, for instance, a place like Twitter, where a lot of the war of positions is being fought and manipulated. And you should also be in touch with that. Don't just stick to books. Also stick to what's more known as popular culture, I guess. Which book in my wall would I recommend? There's so many. You guys wouldn't believe this, but the sort of political work that I do, I appreciate it. I think it's fun, but at heart, I'm a philosopher. It's what I enjoy doing. And my favorite philosopher, the person who I enjoy the most researching, is this guy over here, G.W.F. Hegel. So, favorite book, I would have to probably say that it's either The Science of Logic, a book that I spent 6 to 8 months grueling through, 3 to 4 years ago. I had to read it alongside quite a bit of secondary material in order to digest it and understand it. But it was so fruitful because it was such a difficult enterprise. But I came out of it, I feel like a new human being, someone thinking through a whole different paradigm. I found that perhaps before I was, of course, extremely well read in Marxism, and I knew all the terms, the laws of dialectics and all that stuff. But I find that a lot of people just read that and they stay within the same Weltanschauung, they stay within the same worldview. But what they do is fundamentally change a series of concepts. I felt that when I went through Hegel, it was really that experience of almost like an intellectual rebirth. It actually changed not just the conceptual apparatus. In many ways, the conceptual apparatus remained very similar because I had inherited it just from my readings of the classics of Marxism. But it really changed my worldview. At least it was what for me I understood as the most significant last step. And he's someone who I'm always going back to. So I would say the science of logic. I like the phenomenology. It's an extremely comprehensive text. It's a text that the reviews that came out, I actually have had a chance to read some of the reviews that came out when it was written, and people were going crazy because he literally deals with so many different fields and combines them in such an organic manner that it's a beautiful intellectual enterprise. It's something akin to like Plato's Republic, where you have so many different fields of philosophy that are present. I think Marx's Capital in some ways is similar to that, because it's not just a text of political economy. It's very clearly laden with philosophical undertones and overtones, right? But it has a little bit of everything. It's a very comprehensive and it's a very comprehensive text, and that's what makes world historical books world historical. What else? I like the Grundrisse, mainly because I appreciate how it's a good midpoint between the earlier, more philosophical manuscripts from Marx and the later economic writings. I don't think there's two Marx, a young and an old. I think Marx and Marx and Engels specifically have to be taken as an organic, developing totality. We can't disconnect the young Marx from the old one. We have to see how the young Marx developed into the old one. And the Grundrisse presents a nice midpoint in that development. And it's a very, very enjoyable read. You see hints that you'll see a little bit more developed in Capital, and then you also see themes such as the question of alienation, which we got to see in the Paris manuscripts published in the 1930s. We get to see those themes much more refined in the Grundrisse, which, if I'm not mistaken, is 1857 to 59. 57 to 59 manuscript. So it's a good midpoint. Let's see. My opinions on the Frankfurt School. This is a great question. I think that the Frankfurt School were reacting to the later Frankfurt School, perhaps to certain forms of dogmatism that they were seeing in the Soviet Union. The problem was that, I mean, you can take a text like Marcuse's Soviet Marxism, for instance, that tackles it head on. You know, who is Marcuse citing primarily? He's either citing from like the Soviet manuals, which were like massive, Che Guevara called them ladrillos. They're massive bricks used to help previously illiterate peasants basically understand philosophy and Marxism, and that did so quite well. So taking these very elementary texts that in some areas had some shortcomings, specifically in philosophy, or taking the specifically the dialectical and historical materialism section of the short course on the history of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union Bolshevik, that section of Stalin's text, which is not bad as an elementary text, as an introductory text, but is something that again has some downfalls and could very much be developed um, into something that's more concrete, more complex, and more in tune with the sort of spirit of writing that Marx and Engels and Lenin um, engaged in. But to take these sorts of elementary texts as the be all of the sort of theory that was coming out of the Soviet Union is quite absurd. It's like taking, an elementary school textbook on biology and judging it in accordance with a completely different standard, and then condemning it on the basis of the fact that you applied to it the wrong standard. These texts were not meant to be the most theoretically creative and advanced expositions of Marxism. These texts were meant to be elementary introductions to Marxism for the general populace. And when you take that and you submit it to a level of scrutiny that they did, it's kind of just foolish. It'd be like showing up to watch The Boy in the Striped Pajama and rating it as if it was a comedy. I mean, it's preposterous. Can you imagine a review of someone that says, I didn't laugh much in The Boy in the Striped Pajama, therefore I'm going to give it a 2 stars. It's ridiculous. So some of the Frankfurt School theorists precisely engaged with what they call Soviet Marxism in that form. And even that idea of Soviet Marxism presupposes that there's this homogenous entity called Soviet Marxism, and that was never the case. There was always plurality, there was always debate. There were some theorists and thinkers that were extremely rich. There were some that were kind of just repeating canonically, certain basic dogmatic things. And it was complex. It was in many ways pluralistic, but within the confines of the revolution. I can't imagine, finding a richer Marxist-Leninist philosopher than Evald Ilyenkov, writing in the late 60s and 70s. Extremely rich. Why is it that, someone like Ilyenkov is virtually unknown in the West until the last few years, but the Frankfurt School is found in every single academy in the country? It's because of the role that the Frankfurt School has played as a form of a compatible left. They have been what I have called in my book, The Purity Fetish, which is back there, a controlled form of counter-hegemony, right? They present a critique of capitalism that is usually ahistorical and culturalist, but it's done precisely for the case of almost like recuperating the dissenting attitudes that are in the masses, who naturally come to dissent because of the objective realities of capitalism, and then have those attitudes and those individuals be folded into a generally pro-imperialist fold. If you look at the work that the Congress for Cultural Freedom did in promoting these thinkers, it's there, it's clear. They were uplifted and proliferated precisely because they were anti-communist, because they drew this equalization. They equated basically the Soviet Union with capitalism. And as Howard Zinn teaches us, if you try to be neutral on a moving train, you're just going to support the dominant order. It's a very abstract negation, and an abstract negation, as Hegel tells us, there's always a positive content to negation. And abstract negation reaffirms that which it claims to be negating. So I think the Frankfurt School in many ways are the compatible left, one of the archetypes of the compatible left, propped up by the institutions of the imperialist state and by major capitalist foundations. And there's been a plethora of research done on this, a lot of which we've covered on the channel. So you can find more of that there. But I also, as someone who's very much influenced by Lukács and Gramsci, wrongly placed within the tradition of Western Marxism. I don't think they're Western Marxists. I think they're just Marxist-Leninists. Lukács tells us that, Marxist-Leninist critique requires a different dimensions, right? It's not enough just to talk about the class background of a theorist. It's not enough just to talk about the social function that their theory plays. You also need an immanent critique. So you need to be able to address the arguments that these people are making and either show that their arguments are based on erroneous questions, so question the question itself, or that the answer that they provide to the question is erroneous, and demonstrate that you can provide a superior answer. So the critique of the Frankfurt School, I don't think, should be limited to just showing how they were propped up by the imperialist state. That's a central component in the critique. The critique of the Frankfurt School shouldn't just be limited to, for instance, something that Perry Anderson does, who's part of the tradition of Western Marxism as a trot, where he says that in distinction to previous Marxists, these Marxists were primarily rooted in the academy. So we have the question of the class background there. So those two components are important, but they're not enough. You have to critique them and destroy them at the very level of their theory. You have to critique them imminently. So on the basic of the internal logic that animates their arguments. And that's what I think, debunking a philosopher entails. I did an article on Heidegger a while back, and we have to ask, why is Heidegger so popular, even in some areas of the left, not just in the US, but around the world? Why is Heidegger popular if he was just a Nazi? And I don't think it's enough just to go to, he was a Nazi and he was expressing the sentiments of the petty bourgeoisie, and his social function was X, Y, or Z. That's necessary, right? But we also have to critique them on the basis of his philosophy itself. And I hold the same opinion of the Western Marxists, and I try to do that in my book on the purity fetish. I describe their class basis. I describe the social function that they play for the dominant order, and I take them at the very level of their theory, and I show how they don't live up to the questions that they pose, and that some of the questions that they pose are erroneous in the first place. So thank you for that great question. Which Hegel book is good for a beginner? It depends on which specific question are you asking. Like writings from Hegel himself, I would say the lectures on the history of philosophy and his encyclopedia, which contains what's also called as the shorter logic. This is Hegel writing in a way that's much more lucid, right? If you're talking about secondary texts about Hegel, if you're interested in the phenomenology, the most important text that I can recommend is Terry Pinkard's Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, the Sociality of Reason, which is somewhere back there in the second aisle. It's amazing. I would also very much recommend another book from Terry Pinkard that's quite old and out of print, which is called Hegel's Dialectics, where he takes a general overview of the classics of Hegel's life work. I would also recommend, and this might be paradoxical with the previous statements I made, but I would recommend Marcuse's Reason and Revolution, which is a text that seeks to resuscitate Hegel in a context where he's being wrongfully blamed basically as the theorist behind Nazism. That text is quite comprehensive, and it's pretty good. If you're interested in a sort of intellectual biography of Hegel, I would definitely recommend Terry Pinkard. There's also a recent one that I was able to get a few chapters in. I can't remember the name, but it's from a German scholar, and it was just recently translated. Stephen Holgate has done great work on Hegel's logic. There's stuff that I disagree with Holgate on, but very impressive scholar. Charles Taylor is another one that he wrote an important book called Hegel, dealing with the main text from Hegel that had been translated at that moment, and it kind of resuscitated research on Hegel in the West. So Charles Taylor is of course coming from an idealist perspective, and he's the type that reads Hegel in a very religious and idealist form. I prefer a sort of materialist Leninist reading of Hegel. I think Pinkard is a lot closer to that than Taylor, but Taylor's book is definitely helpful. Okay. It's a good way to get to Hegel from Marxism because there's no guarantee you come to Marxism from Hegel. Yes, I agree. Spirkin, no, I actually haven't. I do have, my dad has some of his Spanish books because he read them in Cuba, but I haven't yet. I've talked to my father about Spirkin, though. Let's see. Lenin's philosophical notebooks are really good. If you read Hegel's Science of Logic, the translation from A.V. Miller, which is the one that's in the Marxist Internet Archive, it already inscribes Lenin's notebooks basically onto the text. That's how I read it the first time I read it. There is, however, a new translation from an Italian guy, which is the green version that's up here, that I've been plowing through. Because unfortunately, what you have to do when you're an academic is that if there's a new translation, you basically have to reread it, so that when you cite the book, you cite from the new translation. It looks bad to be citing from the older one. Yeah, absolutely. I call that the paradox of the Western Marxist in my book on the purity fetish. Thank you so much, Back from the Road, for the $20 super chat. That's huge. Is ACP going to produce a theoretical publication other than a manifesto like a quarterly? Yes. We haven't announced this publicly, but I don't think there will be any problem announcing it publicly. But we're going to be doing a monthly theoretical journal called Red America. And that's something that will be not just, for party people writing, but we're going to have communist scholars from around the world, some of them party aligned, some of them not. And we'll also have, people that are sympathetic to some, sympathetic to Marxism, whom we might have a different understanding of Marxism, but we'll allow them to publish. For instance, there are there's many new books that are coming out on Marxism from various series from major editorials, and we do plan on interviewing some of these people, even though they're not aligned with ACP or anything. So it's going to be a serious theoretical journal. I think it's high time that we have a quality communist, Marxist-Leninist theoretical journal out of the U.S., and we hope to try to fulfill that role. And it's going to be monthly, so it's going to be on a subscription basis for those interested. So look out for that. That's going to be one of my main tasks with the party, besides the other educational work that we're doing. I sent out the reading list. I'm guessing all members should have it by now. If you haven't, then there's a problem there. But we're going to be doing every quadrimester, so every 4 months, an exam based on a reading list that I prepare and send. So that'll be one component of my work. The other component is going to be working as the chief editor for that journal. I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm going to address it and assume you're asking in good faith. If you read my book on the purity fetish, I credit as intellectual inspirations both Losordo and Jones Manol, as well as others. For instance, Gabriel Rockhill, when it comes to his research on the political economy of knowledge of the global theory industry. The way that I understand my project is as someone who's contributing to the Marxist-Leninist critique of Western Marxism. So I did not take anyone's idea. I develop it into something that I think is broader and more refined and concretized, but I make it very much explicit that I'm working upon their legacy. I'm writing in many ways on the shoulders of intellectual giants and people who I very much admire. And from what I have seen, in Manol's preface to my book that's being published in Brazil, uh, he, he understands that I take that analysis a different way, and it's a way that he has expressed, at least in his contact with me, interest in. So again, it's not an either or. I see it as a collective project, and if people have critiques of the purity fetish and they're good faith critiques, I welcome those. I hope to be able to refine my analysis so that it more accurately reflects the world, and it's a higher level of critique. Um, but I do think that the intellectual project that I embark on in the purity fetish, in my opinion, I might be wrong, but it's absolutely essential for understanding the flaws of Western Marxism. And the way that I think about Jones Manol's fetish of defeat is as one manifestation of this general worldview that I call the purity fetish. So, um, yeah. I also have a book coming out next year called On Domenico Losurdo's Western Marxism, where I'm clear about the areas where I'm comradely critical or constructively critical of Losurdo, the areas where I think Jones Manol advances Losurdo, and the areas where I embark on a broader, more general intellectual project. Oh, baby's crying in the back. I hope that helps to clear up any misconception. Yes, it's going to be published through the ACP, not like the institute, and yes, it's going to be in house. It's not going to be like Amazon publishing or anything like that. It's going to be an in house publishing. Uh, I like literature, but I feel guilty when I read literature. I feel like I should be reading theory, so I struggle with it psychologically because it feels like I'm participating in leisure, and I don't like participating in leisure. I like constantly working. Is ACP on any side in the dock worker strike? Yes, our members are going to be going to the front lines of the strike. They're going to be, bringing food and drinks to the striking workers, and you can expect that we'll be doing some interviews with the comrades that were able to make it out to the picket line. We'll also probably have Kyle Pettis on, who's the Institute's chief labor analyst, to tell us about the sort of conditions that led to this strike, which is very exciting, man. The working class in this country is waking up, and they're not ideologically pure. For some of them, it was Bernie. For some of them, they're still apolitical. For some of them, specifically in the Midwest, they see Trump wrongly, just like the people that see Bernie as a messiah. For some of them, they see Trump as a messiah, as the guy that's actually going to drain the swamp and be anti-establishment. I think those are all forms of spontaneous class consciousness that have various different downfalls, but that have a rational kernel. And that rational kernel is the fact that in many different ways, people are dissenting. And in my opinion, the job of the communist is the individual that goes to all of these spaces, understands the common sense that these people are operating with, what Gramsci called spontaneous philosophy. And on the basis of that is able to identify the rational kernels that can help to bring them to a higher level of class consciousness, the sort of point of contact through which you can then bring them to socialist class consciousness. So the way that we've been thinking about this is through three terms. What we provide is coherence. That's what the Marxist outlook provides. It provides you a coherent understanding of the systematic roots of our individual ills. Once we have different worldviews, or people that came from different understandings of the crisis have the same coherent outlook, you've created the premise for unity, right? So if the MAGA worker and the Bernie worker and the apolitical worker come to agree with Marxism, that division that they had is overcome, So you have coherence, unity. And once you understand the problem of the system, implicit in understanding it is the fact that there's a way forward. And that way forward is rooted in the working class's struggle for a world that is shaped in its own image, a world where we have that proletarian dictatorship, where power is actually in the hands of the people, a world that's actually genuine, democratic, or to put it in American terms, a world where society in general, not just the government, but the economy and everything else, is actually of, by, and uh, for the people. So that's that. I haven't seen any of this before. I'm in close contacts with friends from Jones Manoa. I had someone sent me a message that he said something akin to that. I quickly got in contact with people close to him, and um, they couldn't confirm anything, and they said that the messages were ridiculous. And um, so none of this has been verified, but I know this, man. We have been lied about consistently. Um, with all the respect, Mr. Sum, I think some of the assumptions that you've been operating with have also been premised on lies. I don't blame you for it. It's the general atmosphere of anyone who tries to put secondary contradictions aside and unite with people on the basis of principal contradictions at hand, which are imperialism, this genocide, this proxy war, the tiptoeing of all of humanity into a third nuclearized world war, and the principal contradiction of capital and labor, the need to advance the class struggle and bring our working class into a position of political supremacy and control over the state. So the people that say, hey, we have to unite over these main things and some of the other struggles that have, importance, but of a secondary and tertiary character, have to not be put aside, but handled as contradictions amongst the people, as Mao said, are going to be slandered by people whose whole political framework is based on the purity fetish. It's a framework that says that if you don't measure up in each instance to these ideas, if you don't purely measure up to the ideas of what I consider to be right and enlightened that are in my head, I'm going to condemn you. And that's a very futile form of doing politics. That's a form of doing politics that develops out of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And that's kind of the essence of this compatible Marxism. It's not without reason that even though we've had objectively revolutionary conditions here in the US, the existing institutions of the left have not been able to do much. And I'm not here trying to speak from some high horse, but I think, I might be wrong, history might prove me wrong, but I think that the American Communist Party has the most potential we've seen in many, many decades for playing the role of the vanguard party, precisely because even in the very act of being founded, it's a process of bringing together people who have different opinions, who disagree on various things, but bringing them together on the basis of focusing on the principal contradictions at hand and rooting the goals and aims of the party and the methodology on getting results. If you don't get results in our party, you're not going to be in it for very long. And that goes especially for the leadership. So I don't know if what he said was true. Sources close to him said that it didn't seem likely, that it basically wasn't. But I wouldn't blame him if he said that. There's so much misinformation about our party, about our organization, about my work, about the Institute and other groups that I can't blame anyone for being confused. And that's why I'd like to affirm that anyone who wants to speak to us, I'm here. I'm willing to speak. I'll keep my cool, unless you go on and say like some nut job did last time that Stalin killed 2 million Jews. It's such a preposterous thing because when the Nazis invaded a certain region that was populated heavily with Jews, Stalin would pull them out so that they wouldn't get massacred. And Stalin was the only one that used armaments to bomb the rails that were used to take people to concentration camps. So if you come around talking about Stalin killed X million people, and I give you a good faith answer for 30 minutes, and then you continue to be a jerk, I might get hot. But I'm interested in speaking to anyone, and we're open always to critique, and we've done self critique publicly many times. I published a recent article called "On the Dialectics of Unity in the Left," where in the article itself, I critique myself and I cite some of my older articles and I critique them. So we're always open to talking to anyone. If conversations haven't happened, it hasn't been because of our side of the things. It's usually because of the other side. So is ACP the old left? Um, I've seen people who say that movements like Sarah Wagenknecht in Germany and Galloway and ACP are like a return to an old left. In the U.S., the old left also failed. I mean, it was under a lot of pressure from the State Department, but it also failed in some significant ways. It wasn't able to develop Marxism in the context that it was in, and in some cases was just kind of following whatever Moscow said. And we have to be realist about this. Those were mistakes. And there was brilliant thinkers upon which we could have developed the foundation of American Marxism. People like Du Bois, who emphasized the centrality of the color line. That's something that I bring up in my book, Why We Need American Marxism. I call him the father of American Marxism. So we don't want to go back, although we're conscious of the fact that in order to go forward, we need to have a basic sense of acknowledgement for what has came before us, and let this acknowledgement of the progressive and socialist and labor struggles that have came before us be the historical legs upon which we build our movement. We have to understand that our fight is not just for a future, to secure a future for our families, our kids, grandkids, etc. It's also not just for the present. It's a fight for the past. It's so that the comrades who have dedicated their lives, who have sacrificed employment, who have been killed, who have beaten, tortured, and censored, so that their struggles don't die in vain, right? There's a little bit of Benjamin here, but I think it's clear we don't want those people who dedicated their lives to the same projects to have their fights have gone in vain. So there's a sort of historical dimension, a backward-looking dimension to our struggle that goes backward, not to stay there and say this, we're the new old left, but goes backward so that it can build a conscious continuity and a project that redeems the struggles of the comrades of the past. And so that when we open the textbooks, it's not just a bunch of American exceptionalism, a domesticated caricature of King and other Black revolutionaries at the forefront of the struggle against the color line, but so that it's textbooks that depict the class struggle, that show the working class heroes that did exist and that have been either ignored or domesticated by bourgeois textbooks. So that's another dimension to the struggle. So that's why I wouldn't say that we're part of an old left, but we do take cues from it. Some very central ones. Okay. Yeah, the comrade here has shared a few messages with me about this book. I've been meaning to get into it. Do you still support the Saturday Free School? Um, I'll say this: we wouldn't be where we're at now without Dr. Montero, and he was one of the persons that whose critique of our institute has been the most formative for us. Without his critique, I wouldn't have delved a whole year into Du Bois. And one of the central theories that we have, which is the theory of Du Bois as the father of American Marxism, the role of the Black Freedom Movement as the the front lines of the class struggle in the U.S. It comes from the research that we embarked on thanks to Dr. Montero. So he's someone who I admire tremendously as an intellectual, and um, no amount of intellectual turns he might take. I haven't been keeping up, frankly. It's a lot to handle between teaching, writing, the institute, the party work, and being a father. So I haven't been able to keep up too much, but I'll always be grateful for his insights and how um, they allowed us to participate in self critique, and I think become better theorists. So I never said that I spoke with Jones, by the way. I said that I've spoken to people that are friends with Jones. And if that's what he thinks, he's entitled to his opinion. I think it's wrong, and I'd be happy to speak with him to clear up any misunderstandings. Da, 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 da. Inshallah. Inshallah. I saw the post. I thought it was quite absurd, to be frank. It was premised on a lot of lies and general misunderstandings about the work that we're doing. But if you have any, serious argument or point that you would like to get across, I'd be more than happy to discuss it with you and give you my perspective on things. Yes, ACP New York is one of the largest chapters in the country. We have a ranking on our website, acp.us, that shows the influence of each chapter. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that New York was either number one or number two. So you can join if you're interested at acp.us, and we'll get you in contact with your chapter executive, which is Spiros, someone who's done amazing work as far as everything I've seen. I have no idea what this is. Much thanks to Montero, indeed. He's an amazing thinker. Um, I think this is the attitude we must all have. I think even those that are operating with misconceptions about what we're about, I think a lot of them mean well. I really do think a lot of them mean well, and you don't convince everyone or win arguments on the basis of screaming. At least I don't think you do. And if I've ever embarked in those sorts of activities, I think sometimes it's been justified. Other times, perhaps I could have been better. But it's an attitude I think we should all have. It's called self-criticism. Um, and I mean, I don't just dismiss the critiques I've seen. I actually try to reflect on them and see if there's any basis. And what I find is that a good amount of them, with few exceptions, are based on assumptions that are incorrect. And if that's the case, then all I can hope for is that people are interested in having a conversation, and we can clear up what the disagreements are. The comrades in Texas are, besides doing the regular cleaning up of communities and I forget what else. There's a lot of chapters that I've been peeking at here and there, but I think they're currently being prepared to help the workers that are going to be striking, specifically in Houston, I think. So we might have them on the show at some point to discuss how that picket line experience was. Okay. Before we wrap up, I want to talk about the recent article I did. It was published in the China Academy. Let me pull up which that's better. Okay. I'm going to scoot over just so that my face doesn't get blocked by the screen share. I initially named this article "The End of History" because that's part of. No, it was "Freedom and the End of History." By the way, for those that are interested, I'm going to link the article in the chat so you can check it out. It's honestly an honor to be featured in the China Academy. Their newsletter is like, it has like 150 million people signed up to it. So that's pretty cool that my article was able to reach something akin to those numbers. So we have, of course, in 1989, the famous proclamation from Fukuyama, who said that after the fall of the Berlin Wall, that capitalist liberal democracy was the end of history. And that's that, liberal democracy won. We existed in a post-ideological era. There was a lot of works on philosophy challenging this idea of a post-ideological era, which is perhaps the most ideological statement you could make. The most ideologically latent statement you can make is to say that there is no ideology that is structuring our thinking. But I think if you look at some of the leading magazines and journals of the American ruling class, the people that defend American imperialism and its junior partners in Europe, everyone admits that we're in a period of transition. That 2 decade lived experience of the end of history has itself come to an end. And that's because it's kind of foolish to talk about the end of history. Everything, nature, society, human thinking, exists in a constant process of development, propelled by its own contradictions, such that everything that comes to be, as Goethe has Mephistopheles say in Faust, everything that comes to be deserves to perish wretchedly. And that short interlude where the US held on to a unipolar, constantly dwindling, but unipolar hegemony was bound to come to an end. It was an interesting end of history, though, right? Where like the US, right from the start, was free to loot the rest of the world, starting with Russia, where the shock therapy led to the deaths of millions and almost basically general societal collapse. But specifically in the Middle East, where we've seen over the last 2 decades tens of millions of people killed and many, many more displaced from their homelands. So what type of an end of history is that, where the U.S. is without any restriction, waging war on the vast majority of humanity, killing millions and millions and millions of people. So it's a pretty ridiculous claim to have, and I know Fukuyama has since walked back on it, but we have to take account of that foolishness, and it's one that's rooted in the bourgeois outlook. The bourgeois outlook thinks of things in the world in a very fixed and static mode. They separate everything from context. For them, history doesn't exist. For them, contradictions don't exist. That's the only philosophical framework that would allow you to make such a ridiculously bold and absurd claim, such as, we have achieved the end of history, which was done in a way that is uh, much more ridiculous than when Hegel did it. For Hegel, history was conceived of as the self-consciousness of the concept, of the notion of freedom, such that if you have in the Oriental world, as he called it, the conception that one is free, God, you have in the Greco-Roman world the conception that some are free, the citizens, Aristotle's natural slaves are not free. You have in the Germanic Christian world the conception that all are free. All are the children of God, and therefore all are free. So for him, when he proclaims the end of history, what he is referring to is a state where humanity has achieved, in the Greco-Roman religion, right, the understanding that all human beings are free. So the understanding, in part, of humanity itself, right, as a reality, as a species, as a real species. Before that, you are operating with a fragmentation of humanity itself into different types. This is what's interesting if you look at the critiques that Marx levies against Aristotle at the beginning of the first volume of Capital. One of the things that he mentions is that he cannot solve the quandary of value, precisely because for him it's impossible to have the commensuration of labor in the form of abstract labor, because there's no concept of humanity, because humans exist in a almost like tribalistic form, such that there's no common species foundation that we all share in. We can dispute as to how much that's true, but it is the case that for Aristotle there's natural slaves and there's people that are not natural slaves. There's barbarians and there's citizens, enlightened citizens. So for Hegel, he says the end of history, Europe is the absolute end of history, simply because for him it was in Europe where we proclaim the self-consciousness of the universal character of the concept of freedom, right? The thing is that that's not how Fukuyama's proclaiming the end of history. He's proclaiming the end of history as like what literally comes to mind when we think of the end of history. Like, history's done, this is the end. This system, this reality that we have now, that's it. That's for good. And that's not at all what Hegel really meant when he talked about the end of history. Either way, what we're seeing today is the end of history. We're seeing that world which was supposed to be final crumble right before our very eyes. And what has happened is that in the last 2-3 decades of the supposedly end of history, we've seen the resurgence of civilizational states and nation states who can draw back on millenniums-long experiences and who have been able to modernize in a way that incorporates the insights and experiences of their millennium-long civilizations. Take, for instance, the cases of China, the cases of Iran, the cases of Russia. And the interesting thing here, specifically in the case of these countries, is that modernization did not take the form that it took in the capitalist West. What did you need for modernization in the capitalist West? You needed plunder. You had the genocide of Amerindian populations. You had the African slave trade. You had the most brutal forms of colonialism, imperialism, neocolonialism. It is upon that foundation of blood and dirt, as Marx called it, that Western modernity, capitalism, is based. Capitalist modernization is based on that. blood, on massacres, on genocides, on slavery, on exploitation, on sexism, right? So what you have is a modernization that didn't require any of that. Neither China nor Russia nor Iran are committing genocides. Neither China nor Russia or Iran have required the African slave trade or the enslavement of any people in order to develop. Neither China nor Russia nor Iran have required the depositing of themselves as an imperial power. Now, here people can bring up Ukraine, and if they're operating with the CNN worldview, but that's not imperialism. That has nothing to do with imperialism. That's a defensive intervention to prevent a massacre of the people of the Donbass, an ongoing genocidal attack on the people of the Donbass that was about to escalate right before the SMO. And it's a project that requires genuinely denazifying a state that was being ran by Banderite Nazis and that was being instrumentalized by the West to attack Russia. Not because Russia is socialist or communist, but because, as Domenico sort of points to correctly, ever since the Bolshevik Revolution, Russia stopped being white. It became a part of the third world. There was racist white supremacist theorists from the beginning of the last century who said that now that Russia had its revolution, it's lost its white card. Now now there are a bunch of Mongolian hordes or something like that, right? And so Russia became very clearly a part of the third world. And what we've seen done to Russia is the same attacks that we have seen done to the rest of the global south. And what we see in this proxy war against Russia and Russia's actions in the SMO is a country defending itself from imperialist encroachment, specifically taking the form of a very explicit Nazism with Banderism and the attempt to cleanse the whole people of the Donbass. So that has nothing to do with imperialism. And then people might bring up China's loans to Africa as a way of debt trapping and imperialism. It's another ridiculous point. China's interests with the loans that it gives to Africa are of the same character of the loans that the U.S. gave Europe in the post-war period. So they're loans that are genuinely given out to help the development of these regions. That's why most African leaders who are not puppets of the West are very clear about the fact that, the West has brought here only exploitation and destruction and bloodshed. But China has brought schools and infrastructures and roads and a real economy. And, the African people and the Chinese people have very close civilizational bonds, and China's helping Africa develop. And some of the debts have even been canceled for various countries in the global south. So this claim that China's imperialist is completely absurd. So when we look at it, we have seen rapid modernizations far quicker than ever before, taken by states that didn't require genocide, that didn't require an African slave trade, and that didn't require imperialism. So it's not of the same character. And the developments of these states have allowed for the neocons and the American imperialists to not be able to realize their plan for a new American century, which would have been a very scary plan where the vast majority of humanity would have been subjected to servitude, to just serve as peons to the American imperialists. So, as I mentioned, this idea of the end of history comes from Hegel. In Hegel, it's interpreted in a completely different form. For Hegel, it's the end of history because history is, again, this consciousness, this self-consciousness of the concept of freedom. And when you get to a position that all men are free, that all humans are free, you get to the end of history. You can't universalize beyond that. So what's interesting is that this recognition of universal freedom is something that's precisely still recognized by the imperialist West and by the U.S. The U.S. wages wars where it enslaves people, where it poses the most anti-democratic tyrannies possible, where it imposes the most stark inequalities, precisely under the name of promoting freedom and democracy and equality, all of these bourgeois values. Um, so what's interesting is that instead of having the self-consciousness of this universal freedom be used as an essential component towards the realization of real freedom, what we find in the West is that the self-consciousness of universal freedom is used precisely to legitimate the most profound and real and actual unfreedoms in the world. And when we look even further, we find that because of its mass media and the indoctrinating pseudo education that our children receive here in the US, they strip us of even having the lexicon through which we can articulate our very own unfreedom. The unfreedoms that we experience, and I mentioned a little bit earlier how Americans are dissenting in a million different ways. It is very rare that they turn around and say, oh, it's the capitalist system that dominates over the US. There's always some boogeyman other that the media and the education feeds you, whether it's China, Iran, Russia. The blame for the condition that you're in is never accurately assigned to the system itself. It's always externalized to some pariah other. And what ends up happening is a dual effect, right? Blame is removed from the US capitalist imperialist system, exported to a convenient other who always is, a challenger of US hegemony. But also in externalizing that condition of unfreedom, what you end up finding is that the limitations to your power, to your ability to exert yourself freely and autonomously, appear as if they're merely external. You operate as if you're free, but just blocked off from realizing such a freedom by this boogeyman other. So this is the dual effect that we have when we externalize this blame onto that pariah other, which is what the media is literally there to do. And paradoxically, one of the individuals that described this predicament, I think, quite accurately and succinctly, is Slavoj Žižek, who, of course, as we've spoken of here a million times, is basically someone who is the archetype of this controlled counter-hegemony, a philosopher who somehow always puts a progressive veil on the support of U.S. imperialism, whether it's in the 90s with the bombing of Yugoslavia, or right now with the support for the Banderite Nazi forces in Ukraine. Nonetheless, he paints this predicament very succinctly when he says that we feel free because we lack the very language to articulate our unfreedom. So instead of thinking about history, if you want to continue to think about it in terms of freedom, as the development of the self-consciousness of freedom, we should think of it as the development of the actuality of freedom. And although Hegel's not necessarily thinking of it in this form, in Hegel, we are given the conceptual tools to embark on this turn towards thinking of freedom as merely conceptual and as a problem of self-consciousness and recognition, to thinking of freedom as something actual. Because Hegel gives us the understanding, systematizes the understanding of the concrete character of universals, right? If something doesn't take on a particular form, if it doesn't become real, if it doesn't become actual, which for Hegel means the combination of essence and existence, if it doesn't become actual, it's empty, it's hollow. So he's going to say here, and I quote Hegel, man knows what he is, and only when he does so is he actually what he is. Without this, knowing reason is nothing, nor freedom. So for there to be actual freedom, this real self-consciousness, it needs to become actual. If not, we have freedom in form without any content. It's just empty and hollow. And here Hegel himself says, quote, freedom can, however, be also abstract freedom without necessity, which is a false freedom. And for that reason, it is self-opposed, unconsciously limited, and imaginary freedom, which is free in form alone. This is precisely the type of freedom that we have in the US. It's completely empty and indeterminate. It is captured nicely in the dictum from the French philosopher Michel Cluscard, who says that it is a freedom where everything is allowed, but nothing is possible. Everything is allowed, but nothing is possible. Instead, we must use the tradition of Spinoza and Hegel and Marxism and their understanding of freedom to realize that freedom is always determinate. It's always freedom for whom, to do what? That's the Leninist question, right? It always takes on a determinate form. And what we find is that freedom requires precisely the recognition of necessity. Freedom is not being devoid of any restraints. Freedom is acknowledging those real necessary restraints, that necessity, that lawfulness, and acting autonomously on the basis of that recognition of necessity. So, in our current social conjuncture, this requires the recognition of the fact that the destiny of humanity, the trajectory that we embark on as a society, is based on very real laws of social development, laws that are outlined and explained by Marxism. And if we don't have the recognition of this necessity, we neither have that first step of freedom, neither the ability to affect positively the world upon the basis of this recognition. And this is exactly what the ideological apparatuses of the West and of the U.S. Are tasked with doing. The media, the schools, the entertainment industry, what they provide society itself is the ability for all of us, even in the most stark periods of crisis, such as the crisis of legitimacy that we're in right now, it provides us the distraction that leads us to recognizing a form of false necessity. Instead of recognizing real necessity, which is one of the conditions for freedom, we always recognize a false necessity. As I mentioned, there's always a pariah other upon which blame could be placed. So if we look at history as the history of the actuality of freedom, what what Fukuyama called the end of history was very far from the end of history. But now we're in an interesting predicament where people are coming to realize, slowly but surely, the collapse of this unipolar world, which embodied what was called the end of history. And this is opening us up to the horizon of a new world, a new multipolar world that's going to have its own contradictions. But that if we analyze at least its embryonic components, I find that what Comrade Oscar Rojas, Mexican Marxist economist, mentioned is correct. One of the things that we're seeing is a revolution in the logic of international relations and the geopolitical logic, where what we find is trade on the basis of win-win relations with associated free producers. That's his concept, associated free producers. And when we have that condition, where it doesn't matter if you have a dictatorship of the proletariat in China, or a country like Russia that's technically capitalist, or ran not by the working class. When you have a condition where these societies are consciously recognizing the laws of development of capitalism, of the current world, and intervening in them so that the ultimate goal, the telos, is not the accumulation of capital, but achieving a social and common good, so that use value gets put over and above exchange value. When you have that condition, you no longer have the capitalist mode of production. You might not have socialism or communism, but you have what Oscar Rojas referred to as a communitarian mode of production. The logic that animates society is no longer just profit for profit's sake and accumulating capital for capital's sake. That's what warrants us calling capitalism capitalism. It's capitalism. It's a society that elevates to the level of supremacy the interests of capital. So if we don't have that in this new multipolar world, we have fundamentally a new system that's arising. In some spots, it takes the form of socialism, and others, it doesn't. But it's a new logic that is animating production in the vast majority of the world. So I conclude here with a passage that I'm usually not very poetic in my writing, but I think I accomplished some of it here. I say that Hegel was right then about the sun of history setting in the West. But its setting has long passed. Today, humanity is in an astronomical dawn. Once again, the sun is rising in the east. While it is not fully out, the light has become visible. A new day is here. So, all right, that's that. That's my article on freedom and the end of history. I'm gonna go back to the chat for a little bit, see if there's any questions, and if there are none, I will be heading out as soon as possible. So, if you have any questions, shoot them in the chat now. If not, I'm gonna dip out here pretty soon. Let's see. Blue Card is superb. Yes, he absolutely is. Like the stream. Yes, everyone make sure to like the stream. Thank you, Comrade Lane. Mixed. I mean, it is it's a socialist party, but when I see that one of the first things they ask is the IMF for money, I'm kind of suspicious. But I'm not a specialist on Sri Lanka, so we might have to get Danny on here to do a show with a specialist on Sri Lanka politics. But I think it's we'll see. That's my opinion right now. I've read a few articles on his victory, and some good stuff and some stuff that I'm kind of skeptical about. So yeah, we should be doing that. Danny is probably going to do a stream on this at some point. So okay, if there's nothing else, then I will get going. Thank you to all of those who watched. I invite anyone who has critiques of ours to come on the program. I'll be happy to talk to anyone. And as always, this is a People's Funded Institute. If you support our work, which includes running classes, running a website with active articles, doing these live stream programs, being active on social media, publishing a yearly journal, publishing books, so a million different things besides the party work that we all do. But if you want to support us financially, you can become a patron at patreon.com/MidwesternMarks. You can donate to our live broadcast, or you can consider buying our books at midwesternmarks.com/books. I'd very much recommend you check out my recent book, Why We Need American Marxism, which was published just a couple months ago. Midwestern Marks prices, as always, $15 for the paperback. But without further ado, we'll get going. Thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you all next time.
Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Don't cling so hard to your possessions, for you have nothing if you have no right. Let racist ignorance be ended, for respect makes the empires fall. Freedom is merely privilege extended, unless enjoyed by one and all. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. Let no one build walls to us, walls of hatred nor walls of stone. Come greet the dawn and stand beside us. We'll live together or we'll die alone. In our world poisoned by exploitation, those who have taken, now they must give. And end the vanity of nations, we've but one earth on which to live. So come brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. And so begins the final drama, in the streets and in the fields. We stand unbowed before their armor, we defy their guns and shields. When we fight, provoked by their aggression, let us be inspired by life and love. For though they offer us concessions, change will not come from above. So come brothers and sisters,